Hey everybody, welcome back. For today's video, I'm going to talk about something very near and dear to my heart, and that's notation for drum set. You want to get something across on a drum set, how do you write it? So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of using stems up for things that you would play with your hands and stems down for parts that you would play with your feet. In traditional drum sets, you would have a bass drum and what is called hi-hats, which is a pair of cymbals that go like that. And traditionally, whatever the person's dominant foot is playing the bass drum, and their secondary foot is playing the hi-hat. There are definitely exceptions to all of those things, not the least of which people who have multiple pedal setups who are playing both bass drums and hi-hats with both of their feet. Notwithstanding, it makes it a lot easier for a drummer to see the stem down and know, okay, there's my bass drum or my kick drum. There's where I'm playing my hi-hat with my foot as opposed to playing it with my hand. Those sort of indicators. It also can make a really nice framework on the arranging side if you're doing drum set in the context of a larger orchestration, to say, okay, here's my starting point for what might be the rhythms of my bass line. Put that out there. The second point that I want to make is the concept of using different styles of note heads for different sorts of things. And so the most standard that is out there for drum set notation is if you're going to have a drum, you're going to use a standard note head. And if you're going to have something that isn't a drum, you're going to use a different note head. So obviously on a drum set you have cymbals. Cymbals tend to be notated if you're playing them in normal areas with an X note head. Often people will switch to a triangle or diamond note head if they are intending for you to play on the bell of the cymbal. And there's a couple other exceptions that I'm going to get to later in this video. The third point that I'd like to make is the concept of putting together a key or a legend of where different instruments fall on the staff. It can be very helpful even if you're using 100% traditional, simple stuff, for the drummer to say, okay, yes, I don't need to think about this because I see it. It's right there. I can always go back to it. So, tying directly into that, point number 4 would be that when you have your parts of the drum set, there are fairly standard parts of the standard drum set that get notated in basically the same spots. So if you think in terms of a treble clef, your bottom F space is where your bass drum typically is, and your C space is where your snare drum typically is. If you only have one mounted tom, it tends to be in the E space, and if you only have one floor tom, it tends to be in the A space. If you have multiple toms, depending on whether they're higher or lower, they're either going to be, on the lines in between those. Sometimes I've also seen it done where just the lines are used for toms, especially in like a multi-tom setup. The hi-hat with the foot is typically the D space below, and then the A, that is the first line, ledger line above, is typically crash cymbal. People will differentiate, and sometimes this is based on what their notation software will decide upon, whether the F line or the G space is the hi-hat and the other one is the ride cymbal. And this is again where, coming back to point 3, the legend is really helpful, so that the drummer knows, oh, I'm supposed to be playing on the ride cymbal at this point. Of course, if you have a triangle note head, it's probably a pretty good indication that they want you to play a ride bell. And if it comes in the middle of a pattern, that can differentiate for sure that you're supposed to be on your ride, not on your hi-hat. The fifth thing that I would like to put out there, getting back to the whole idea of different styles of note heads for different kinds of things. So with the snare drum, you have obviously your standard hit. You also have what's known as a rim shot, which is where the stick hits the head and the rim at the same time. And you also have a rim click, and that's where you have the stick across the drum, the tip stays on the drum head, and then you click it across the rim. When you're looking to have that cross stick or rim click, most of the time what you would like to do is change your standard note head to an X note head. For a rim shot, people will sometimes put in the circle with an X through it for a head. Sometimes they'll say put a diamond, but this is definitely where having that legend in place is really helpful. And probably the last notation that we're going to look at for this video, I know I've forgotten stuff and I'm going to come back and say, okay, I need to add this, I need to make a second video. But for this video, the last one that I'm going to cover is the concept of opening and closing your hi-hats. And if you have a row of, whether it's 8th notes or 16th notes or quarter notes on your hi-hat with your X notation for your note heads, if you want to have open ones in the middle, often what you'll do is put an open circle above that note. All right, well, thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful and informative. Leave comments if there's things that you want to see and you have questions about notations. Otherwise, see you on the next one.